Hi, my name is Dwayne Gathers, and welcome to CivitasLA, featuring diverse and emerging leaders who make up this dynamic region and are creating community every day and building a better tomorrow. These bi-weekly conversations enable us to hear from, learn from, and be inspired by a new generation of civic entrepreneurs who are forging a path forward in making the Los Angeles area a stronger, more resilient, and connected group of citizens. Our goal, as always, is to elevate civic discourse, foster community connections, and promote civic knowledge and engagement across the greater Los Angeles region while elevating diverse and emerging voices in that conversation. In 1992, the U.S. Congress passed Public Law 102450, which designated the month of May annually as Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, a time that we focus on and celebrate the significant contributions and influence of Asian Americans and Pacific Islander Americans to the history, culture, and achievements of the United States. So as CivitasLA celebrates Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, we are absolutely delighted to offer this community spotlight episode featuring one of our region's most distinctive and celebrated communities, our Korean community in Koreatown, also known as K-Town. It's often stated that the greater LA area is home to more Koreans and Korean Americans than anywhere outside of Korea itself. Covering an area of roughly 2.7 square miles in the heart of the city, with roughly 120,000 residents, of which about 20% are Korean heritage, this bustling, densely populated area is also known as the first and certainly the most famous Koreatown in the United States. With us this afternoon in studio, I'm delighted to be joined by three distinguished Korean American civic and business entrepreneurs, including Janet Burt of the well-known downtown law firm Louis Brisbois, Alexander Kim, who I've known since my early days in Los Angeles when Alex was working for former Mayor James Hahn, and who has his own public affairs firm, Three Kings Public Affairs, and last but certainly not least, entrepreneur and restaurateur OG Chino of Escala K-Town. Janet, Alex, Chino, welcome to CivitasLA.
Thank you.
Great to have you all with us on this Friday afternoon. So on CivitasLA, we always appreciate it if our guests can offer a brief personal introduction to themselves and your organization. Janet, let's start with you.
Thank you, Dwayne. My name is Janet Burt. I'm the Director of Diversity and Business Development at Louis Brisbois. I know my name does not reflect Korean American. However, I am married to, non-Korean, happen to be Mr. Burt.
Okay.
My maiden name is Janet Choi. I am 1.5 generation Korean American, and I am just so honored to represent Koreatown. So thank you for the invitation.
Great to have you. Alex.
Yes, Dwayne. It's good to see you, especially after the pandemic, after a couple years.
Mm-hmm.
But just to quickly introduce myself, worked in government for the past 20 years. Dwayne mentioned that we met when I was working for the city. When I was working for the city of LA, Mayor Jim Hahn, as one of his aides, covering the Hollywood and downtown communities, including the Koreatown region, and also all of the Asian towns. You're familiar with Chinatown, Thai Town, historic Filipino town, and new ones like Little Bangladesh. But always represented the Asian Pacific community in the very other jobs I've had after working for the mayor. I worked for Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, in that same capacity, but more covering different counties from Santa Barbara to Orange County. Then I had a stint working for SoCal Gas with the same role, being a liaison to the API community, but really more so on community giving and doing corporate philanthropy. And then after that, worked for Councilmember David Rue, which we'll probably get into, in the city of LA as the first Korean American elected to that city. And then most recently working for the Assembly member Cardi Beach Norris that covered the Orange County area, which also has one of the fastest growing Korean American and API communities in the entire U.S.
Wow, terrific. Thank you, Alex. Last but not least, Chino, welcome.
Hey, nice to meet you, Dwayne. My real name is Kyu-min Lee. I was actually born in Korea. The name Chino came way later because I was raised in Colombia, in Bogota, Colombia. So growing up speaking Spanish, when I came to LA, I was 10 years old, and the name Chino was just given to me by my friends because they were all Latinos. and that just stuck with me for the rest of my life, which is the reason for the name
Okay.
Chino. And the OG just comes just because I got old.
Okay. I like that.
I come from a music industry and art background. Being a business person was never my goal in life. But that was just something that happened. An opportunity was offered to me through my sister, and which is the reason today I'm running Escala K-Town, a Colombian Korean restaurant in the heart of Koreatown.
Right.
But yeah, I still don't consider myself a business person. I
Okay.
still consider myself more of an artist.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, let's start our conversation. So during the 70s, after the U.S. relaxed immigration restrictions, more Koreans and a lot of folks from Asia began coming to the United States, and certainly for the Koreans settling in this area called Koreatown. But certainly before that, Koreans began coming to the U.S. in smaller numbers starting in the 20th century. Share with us, maybe, Janet, you can start off, a brief history, your knowledge of the brief history of Korean migration to this area and how this particular geography, K-Town, became such an enclave. And what was your first experience with K-Town as coming to the region?
Sure. I'd love to go ahead and give you a better account of the history. I myself came to U.S. 1983.
Okay.
I was 16 years old, so I'm not going to be able to give you full details of the Korean immigration history, but based on what I have experienced.
Sure, let's talk about your experience.
Yeah, let's start from there. We're very short immigration history relatively. It's about 100 years old. I still recall a few years back when Korean American community celebrated 100 years of U.S. immigration from Korea. When I first came to U.S., Koreatown is a place where, we would go for church. Grocery shopping, restaurant, you name it. When I first came to U.S., we ended up settling in Venice, California, and coming out to Koreatown meant it's like going to hometown, where you're able to go ahead and mingle with the people who look like you, spoke the same language, and being able to go ahead and experience the culture outside Korea. So truly, for many Korean Americans, and we'll talk about it, it's like going back hometown, right? That's what Koreatown meant. And, obviously that really has provided me and us the foundation to be able to go ahead and, spring up and have a better life, right? Because without that, it would have been a completely foreign country for us, especially at age 16 coming to U.S. Can you imagine the cultural shock that I went through? So I still, look at those days going out to Koreatown for the first time and just feeling at home, right? Even though I was in completely different country without speaking the language. So for me, having this town just meant a lot to what I have become.
Yeah.
So.
And Alex, speak to your family's experience coming to the country and the region, and your experience with K-Town.
Of course. Well, my family came in the early 70s, in 1971. He was part of the brain drain, as they call it, recruiting people with certain specific knowledge that could help with the American industry. So he was a top engineer from school there in Korea, and was recruited by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
To help to fight the Russians.
Okay.
Seems like that's a common story to this day as well.
Interesting.
But, as part of the Cold War, and many immigrants were recruited, especially with certain skills. And just like him, he was able to come here, but after that job was over, he had the chance to do something else, to live the American dream. So he did what any immigrant does, is start a restaurant.
Okay. In K-Town?
No, actually, before he did that, he actually was kind of like, if you've seen Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, he started as a Taekwondo grandmaster. He was a grandmaster in Korea and teamed up with other grandmasters and had 3 different dojangs, in American culture they call dojos, like which is a Japanese word, but dojang in Korea.
Yeah.
And did that. There's several other things. He was a dishwasher, security guard, multiple jobs, and eventually saving up enough money to buy his own restaurant, right? Which is people say, "Oh, which restaurant is that? Which Korean restaurant?" No, actually, Italian pizza restaurant. So long story short, that's how we started. But it's what Janet referred to. She was among the different waves. Yeah. But just in brief, depending on who you ask in academia, usually it's three different waves, three or four different waves of Korean, starting from 1903, and then the 60s and 70s, as you referenced to, and then throughout the 80s and 90s, and then continue to this day. So that's how Koreatown continually grows, because we have continuous immigration, but they had different distinctive waves.
Yeah. Well, we know, Koreatown has been long home to a sizable Central American community, as well as a small, but as you referenced, Alex, a strong Bangladeshi community as well. So I'm curious how the community has evolved over time, but certainly that Central American heritage, I think, Chino, you touched on, which I think you have a fascinating story to share about your own Koreatown experience, because you went from Korea to Colombia to Los Angeles. So share with us your journey into this community.
Well, we came here in the late 70s, 1978. And our situation was different because we came here knowing that we came here to study and that we're going to be on our own. It wasn't like a family migration. At the time, a lot of Koreans, I think in other countries, were sending their kids to America to study, and they thought that America was a really safe and a good place to be. So we came to Los Angeles during that era, knowing that we were not here as a family, just us as siblings, and that our mother would be coming back and forth. So we were left unattended for many periods of time. Now we had a sponsor family that were basically the ones that signed off on our student visa, but they were not in the home with us. So unfortunately for me, being the youngest of four, and my oldest sister at the time was only 17, and living on our own, and of course no authority at home, and being a curious kid, I got into what many immigrant kids fell into during that time. The gang culture in LA was probably at its height during that time. It was the thing to do. Like if you're a kid, as soon as you went to school, you had to decide what gang to join, or if you wanted to be a cool kid in school, and many of us wanted to be that. So that was my situation coming to Koreatown. At the same time, I was in an environment with a lot of Koreans all of a sudden. Coming from Colombia, where there was very few families and we're all very tight.
And how was your family in Colombia? How did you get to Colombia?
My father was a diplomat. Yeah, so his assignment was Colombia, and he was basically responsible for establishing the Korean embassy in the mid-60s in Bogota. So we went there as diplomats. Korea at the time was a very poor country, so we experienced Colombia as not, well-off people. We came there and basically started from zero. So my life has always been, highs and lows. So coming to LA and being in that environment wasn't new to me. I felt comfortable being here and being in an environment where I knew wasn't as safe. But coming from Bogota, it was much safer.
Right.
But the thing that surprised me about being in Koreatown is not being accepted by the Korean kids. Because like I said, I came from Colombia where there was few of us and we're very tight. But when I came to LA, most of the Korean kids in Koreatown were still in ESL. I was in ESL.
Okay. Which is English as second language.
Yeah,
Just
that's
for,
right.
for our
English as
audience
second
listening.
language.
For
I don't know
listeners,
Me
if
yeah.
that's
too.
still-
I started
Yeah.
with the ESL.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So ESL was half Latino, half Korean at the time. And I was in the middle. I thought I could be friends with the Koreans, but they didn't embrace me. They thought I was weird for not speaking Korean as well, and I'm for speaking Spanish.
Right.
So I got accepted by the Mexican kids,
Excellent.
and I grew up mostly with them. So my experiences in Koreatown was more from a Latino perspective,
Right. Interesting.
going to my friends' houses and seeing what their mothers do for a living, their migrant lives,
Right.
Excellent.
Well, now that's great. That's really fascinating. We're recording this in Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, May, but certainly a few weeks ago, end of April, a lot of conversations, a lot of stories in the LA Times and elsewhere that, harken back to, the disturbing period of 1992 and the LA riots and the impacts on communities, Black community, Korean community, et cetera. And I noted that there was an author who wrote, Frank Xiong, who noted that, each anniversary, I'm struck by the fact that there's no public memorial or space dedicated to the memory of the riots. Perhaps that absence reflects the fact that we don't all agree on how to remember it. Chino, you said that the riots were not what the media made them to seem to be, namely a racial conflict between Koreans and Blacks in L.A., and in fact, the LA Times article talks about efforts to strengthen relations between Koreans and Blacks, which are not really highlighted as much as could be. So we always want to highlight the positive stuff. Janet, as a noted civic leader here in the community, how do you reflect on that period for you and your family and how we've evolved in terms of interracial relationships?
Very good question. I do vividly remember being in the middle of LA riot. I was a school teacher at St. Brendan School, St. Brendan Parish, right in the middle of Hancock Park. And, we had about total of 300 students. And, outside the school door, riot was happening because school was located right on Western and 3rd.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, yes.
So it was an experience I'll never forget. As a school teacher, it gives you kind of different perspective with the LA riot. It was more than the racial tension, right? It was about the safety and protecting the kids that I am encountering day in, day out.
And what's roughly the demographic makeup of the student population at that time? I'm curious.
Oh, it was very diverse, very diverse. But it is Hancock Park, a parish, Catholic parish. So obviously, we had a lot of white families that's been established in Hancock Park. And then it's a neighboring Koreatown. So we had some Koreatown. It being a Catholic church, we had quite a bit of Filipino American. It was very, very diverse school reflecting the community. And we never really knew it as anything but same Brandon School family, right? When the riot happened, I guess it was a kind of eye-opener. We never really saw each other as a different race or, different colors or faces because we were family, put together in this small space. Now, after the LA riot, I guess, it just really kind of gave us the little awakening. You have to be a little bit more intentional about bringing the diversity together. Of course, at a school level, that's kind of tough to do. School children, you really don't think about that.
Right.
This is all kind of grown-up issue. And after I moved on, now that I'm in a space where I am a director of diversity, I am very, cognizant of what had happened back then, even though it's 30 years ago. The community we're living in, especially in Koreatown, it is just full of diversity, not just ethnic diversity, culture, food. I mean, you name it. A lot of travelers, So what I try to do as a community engagement, try to be more inclusive. And, Koreatown is, I think, known to be very exclusive, unfortunately. And not because we want to be, not inclusive. I think it's because of language barrier, cultural bias.
Sure.
So I'm just trying my very best to go ahead and, talk to the second generation Korean Americans going, hey, let's just give it a try. Do more than, what we normally would do. So that's, something I continue to strive on. And I think we will get there eventually. I know it's been 30 years. We're still working at it. It's still in progress.
Yeah. Alex, give me your thoughts on that time period and where you and your family were in 1992.
Well, my experience was a little bit more distant. I lived in the suburbs at the time, being born in LA, but later on raised in Orange County, which a lot of Koreans did migrate to the suburbs, whether it's the San Fernando Valley area, Cerritos, Garden Grove, all those different other suburbs there. But it immensely immensely affected our state of identity of being Korean American, even if you didn't live in LA. I was a sophomore at college at UC Irvine watching this on TV, and I could not believe what was going on because, a lot of us have friends. They have, people were calling before there was texting. People just called each other saying, Did you see what's on TV here? And some of those buildings were my friends' parents' buildings burning down, and they had to drive to LA. I remember that distinctly. And even in Korean-owned businesses in Orange County, we were scared, because we were thinking, they're going to come for us too? Like, why is Koreatown being targeted, right? Of course, we learned after the fact of what triggered that. It wasn't just police brutality issues. It's also deep divisions between the Black and Korean communities, right? I had to pull shifts with my dad at our retail store in Santa Ana, But we didn't have, we weren't allowed to carry guns. None of us had permits for that. It was a different situation in Orange County, right? There was no big riots happening there, but there were attempts, and that wasn't covered by the media because all the news helicopters were focused on LA, right?
LA, yeah.
And we were people that tried to burn down our building, right? Copycats, that happens all the time.
Yep.
Just opportunities, the mob mentality, right? So for me, the perspective was not anger toward the Black community or any other community. It was more toward, why is this happening?
Right.
Why is this happening again? And notice in the cycle of even specifically in LA, we had riots every generation. We had the Zoot Suit riots that affected the Latino community, right? We had the Watts riots. We have LA riots, and then most recently, Black Lives Matter protests.
Yep.
Some say call it the riots too, right? And the cycle. Why does it keep on happening? So maybe it's leading up to your next question about civic participation, but it produced the riots itself. In 1992, produced a bumper crop of Korean Americans to say people like myself, and Dave Aru to consider politics.
And Chino, you're living this very diverse life in this community with friends of every culture and race, it seems. So, share your perspectives on this and what you saw, and how it's evolved in from your perspective.
Well, what I saw is a rebellion mostly against the system. Anger towards the system, and most communities were torn down by their own. People tore down their own communities. Koreatown was mostly looted and burned down by Koreatown residents. I saw it. If you look at the news, you don't see that many Black people looting in Koreatown in the news footage because there wasn't that many Black people living in Koreatown during that time. Black people were looting and burning down their own neighborhoods. Now, I'm not going to say that was the only thing that happened. Maybe some people took their anger out towards Koreans and targeted Korean businesses. I grew up hanging out with Black kids just as much as Latino kids. And I don't think most people know that there was an urban myth back in the 80s that when there was a boom of Korean businesses opening up in black neighborhoods, liquor stores, mostly liquor stores. And there was a myth in those neighborhoods that Koreans were being given money by the government to specifically open businesses in those neighborhoods.
In those communities, yeah.
So they had a lot of things already built up, you know. And then on top of that, you get Koreans that were new to the country and they don't know how to relate to the community. They don't know how to look people in the eye and say thank you when they buy something. They haggle over the smallest amounts of change. Things that Koreans had as almost as part of culture because of the struggles that Korea went through as a country, that they were poor and they finally have a business, so, and every penny counts. But those things affected relationships a lot between blacks and Koreans in the neighborhoods. And I think the riots, you know, that was a point when a lot, you know, everything that was built up during that time just exploded. But I can't call it racism. It wasn't racism. I had a record store in South Central on Slauson in 88, 89, 90, right before the riots. There was a gang called the Rolling 60s, notorious in LA. They came to my store all the time. During those years, no one ever said anything racial to me, never tried to steal anything from me. I had a really nice experience there, even though I made no business from the community. They considered it almost like a community center, somewhere like the kids would come and do graffiti on my walls and play records and things like that. When the riots happened, I actually asked them. I told them, I said, "Oh man, I'm glad I closed my record store down. It would have got messed up." They were like, "No, we would have been there protecting your shop." After the riots, I heard a story about a Korean lady that was robbed and killed at their business, a liquor store on Van Ness and 54th Street. Korean wrote an article about it, and I was really familiar with that liquor store because I stopped there on my way to my record store. This Korean lady was loved by the black community, and when she passed away, she was robbed by a couple of young gangbanger kids. But when they had a vigil for her, it was just the whole black community
packed.
You know, so it's not racism. You know, it's the situation they put us in. You know, we got Koreans that are brand new from Korea trying to make a living in the States, and all they can afford is a business in the neighborhood. You know.
Well, certainly, you know, that's a great point. So you've got a lot of folks who are new, not even a generation old. This is happening. A lot of articles do reference that, you know, a lot of Korean business owners felt let down by the city in terms of the lack of, you know, protection. And, you know, as Chino mentioned, you know, people don't know how to engage the system. So clearly, subsequent to that, we've got a lot of folks organizing to figure out how to better engage the system, i.e. through civic participation. So, you know, Janet, you know, what have you seen subsequent to that as to how the Korean American community have really banded together to begin to elevate its own participation in the civic life of our city, in our region?
I myself became one of those people. So what I have done is actually set up a nonprofit called Safety Lines. Like Chino was saying, I totally agree. I don't think it's a discrimination. It's a cultural bias, not understanding. It's just the differences that we're not educated on because we're such a diverse community. Yes, law enforcement didn't really, act promptly to protect the Korean community back during the riots. But at the same time, you know, community ourselves really didn't get engaged, you know, civically or public agencies. So what I have decided to do with a few of my friends, including Alex Kim, is that, you know, public safety advocacy is so critical. working with a diverse community, working with a law enforcement agency. We need to be a team, not like separate silo community working on our own, hoping to achieve the American dream. And I think LA riot, I know it's such a long time ago, is still a really good lesson for us. Why we all need to kind of come together, work together, get to know each other, learn, about each other so that history doesn't repeat itself. And Alex, really, I don't want the history to repeat itself, so we really need to continue on.
Yeah. Well, certainly, there have been an explosion of Korean civic organizations, and I well remember, my time when I came to Los Angeles, when I met Alex. I was working for the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation.
That's right.
And the areas that I covered were from Hollywood through downtown and South LA, including K-Town. And I used to, love engaging with the Korean Realtors Association, the faith-based organizations, and there were often times I'd be the only non-Korean at some of these civic meetings. So it was really, really wonderful. But I know certainly as these organizations have evolved, the communities fought long and hard to gather more civic participation, but also political strength in order to really have elected positions. And I know, a decade or more ago that came about in the redistricting process, when I think a lot of people felt slighted that Koreatown was in some regards broken up between 3 council districts in some regard. And I think this most recent process, resulted in the community being in 1 council district. So speak to the reflection of this journey of engaging in the political process, and what you think the outcomes of that might be going forward, Alex, since you worked in City Hall.
Yeah, coming from the perspective of working in government in the city of LA, its mayor's office and its council office, it was like a catharsis to experience the final goal of Koreatown from the Koreatown leaders from the 1992 riots about civic empowerment, about civic engagement, about putting Koreatown in 1 council district. But remember, we had a Korean American that got elected, also Dave Rue, and he, among many Korean Americans, both from the first generation and second generation, had rallies. We had many different discussions at City Hall about having this, having dressed up in "I Love Koreatown" T-shirts in bright yellow with a big old heart, about having this. It symbolizes the increasing strength of Koreatown by having, and even before that, we had a lot of Korean Americans coming into politics at all levels of government, from the federal side, the county supervisor side, city, and they, most were not elected yet, but they were at high levels of government. I was among one of them. I wasn't a high level person, but there was a Korean in the mayor's office or city council office. So, and we organized. It wasn't in the press. It maybe was in the Korean press, but not the mainstream so much. The group called CALS, Korean American Legislative Staff.
Okay.
CALS was, it's still in existence today, but it formed out of an organization called APALS, Asian Pacific American Legislative Staff, and that was formed by the legendary Congress member Judy Chu. Okay. When she was a staffer, right? And John Chung, who ran for governor recently, right? He was a former state treasurer. Exactly. Yeah. So this let's see what happens. There's always a Korean American running for city council in CD10. Grace Yu is I believe the one that's running now. She's run twice before, and there is this hope of one day to have a Korean American there. But we do know that Koreatown is the majority not Koreans. Right. It's Latino. Right. So whoever runs that represents Koreatown, whether they're Korean American or Latino or African American, Jewish American, they have to have coalitions across different cultures.
Absolutely.
That's what Koreatown is. It's a very diverse region.
Absolutely.
So,
but let's not forget, we do have a Councilman John Lee.
John Lee,
representative of a Korean American community, and U.S. Congress that covers the Koreatown. We have a Korean American candidate that's running right now. So as far as the civic engagement, and I think it has gotten very, very active, and especially with the second generation, who are in the forefront, right? It's just going to get a lot more empowered. I
Sure.
think.
Well, certainly what we hear on the podcast often is that representation does matter. And, I think certainly, David Rue, when he was elected to council, only unfortunately served one term, was only the second Asian American to serve on the Los Angeles City Council, and the first Korean American to serve on that council. How are civic organizations engaging with the next generation of leadership? Are there leadership development organizations that you're aware of and involved in? Janet, do you want to speak to that?
We do have a Korean American Democratic
Committee.
right? Where they're gathering all the civic, basically, the engagement people, Korean American. A lot of nonprofit will try to go ahead and promote anybody who is interested in, civic engagement, running for the political candidacy. So there are a lot of movements in a separate pocket. It's not just the one single entity who's promoting this. One of the things that Safety Line is also promoting is, gathering up the second generation Korean Americans, because there is a little bit of disconnect with the first generation. Since we are an immigration community, we have a very unique, our own set of problem, right? So me being 1.5 generation, I'm in a position to be able to connect the first generation to second generation. Usually it's the language that's a barrier.
Right.
Believe it or not, second generation Korean American lost our own language
Right.
capability. So if I were to able to go ahead and bring them together by being able to communicate with them, it's a good thing. So we do have a monthly lunch meeting, trying to go ahead and gather as many Korean American second generation leadership, and that's one of the grassroots efforts that we're doing.
And there is the Korean American Coalition that actually was one of the original Korean American second generation and 1.5 generation groups that did focus on civic empowerment. I'm still on the advisory board there in the Los Angeles chapter, and chapters all across the U.S.
Right.
And you do have that pipeline to encourage people to intern in political offices or nonprofits, legal offices. There's a new one that formed maybe about over 10 years ago called Council of Korean Americans.
Okay.
Also focused on the aspect of getting people engaged civically from a more people that have attained success and want to help out the next
And give back.
third
Absolutely.
generation, right? The second, third generation network of Korean American leaders. I could go on and on. There's several different groups, but the key aspect of this is to make sure that the Koreans don't work within themselves. They have to work closely with other groups that have attained success, like the Jewish American communities, right? The Anti-Defamation League. You got the NALEO, the National Latino Elected Officials that have attained this, African American NAACP. So these are the things that we're still working on. Safety Lines is exactly what we're trying to focus on, working with the mainstream, not just within the Korean siloed area.
No, that's great, and that's obviously the mission of the podcast, which is to elevate civic discourse, foster community connections, and promote civic knowledge and engagement, and to get more people in our region engaged. So that's great. There was a paper that we saw back in 2019, I believe, that talked about the East Asian model of development as denser and greater in pace, scale, and scope than your characteristic Western development. And of course, LA is grappling with the whole idea of density overall. But Janet, you spoke about the distinct culture of Koreans, in particular concerning the mores around commerce. And speak to what's driven Koreatown to be such a dense and dynamic sub-regional economy, and what's driving that development of late.
I would say our motherland, Korea, really helped us to do a kickstart on that. Honestly, even though I am a 1.5 generation Korean American, I kind of stayed away from Koreatown, simply because that was our immigration lifestyle, where you want to be immersed in mainstream. You want to be more like American, being able to speak the language. So I've been kind of staying away, went to school down in Irvine and, worked in a mainstream. Once I got a job at a law firm had a Korea practice. So working as a law firm promoting Korea practice, I had to really look to, hey, where can I go to learn about Korean American or Koreatown, right? So this has been fairly recent development. So recently I started to kind of explore Korean community, hanging out in Koreatown, and exactly what you just stated. Koreatown was going through Renaissance. I mean, there's just so much going on.
It is
Lots
bustling.
of development, diversity at its height, right? And people are very comfortable just walking around, hanging around, very artistic and just, fun place to be in.
Sure.
And then, same question came to me too, just like you. Koreatown was like immigration community. What happened? It's such a unique community. And I got to say, I think mainly foreign direct investment from South Korea, right? We have a Hyundai, we have a LG, so many different corporations doing so well, and they're kind of using Koreatown as a stepping stone to get to mainstream America. And of course, us being Korean American, being outside Korea, we're so patriotic. Right? So anything that has to do with the Korea. When Hyundai first came to Los Angeles back in the 80s, it was like one of the worst cars, worse than Yugo. You remember that?
Oh, we forget that car brand. We forget that one.
I love you guys.
We would buy Hyundai. We'll line up to buy Hyundai just
Okay.
because it came from Korea.
Okay.
And I think that is kind of how the Koreatown was able to go ahead and use it as a tool to go ahead and get to where we're at
Right.
now.
Well, certainly, that Chino, you've been, obviously you say that you're an artist at heart, but you're also an entrepreneur, and you've been a business person in this community for, for since 2014. So what have you seen on the ground as a business person, and what accounts for this vibrancy of this area?
Well, I think Koreatown is sort of like the Brooklyn of LA.
Okay, the Brooklyn of LA.
It's where the young people want to come and live from all over the country, and I think right now there's like a big influx of youth. I mean, by youth I mean people in the 20s and 30s.
So not us.
But people that are coming from all different states in America to LA, mostly because they're interested in the entertainment industry. So it's a lot of musicians, artists, actors, and I think Koreatown is one of the main areas they choose to stay because it's accessible.
Certainly a high walkability factor,
Yeah,
for sure.
exactly. And there's a lot of housing, there's a lot of apartments, and I think that brings a lot to the neighborhood these days, and that makes it a lot more multicultural than what it was, and it was always like the most multicultural neighborhood in LA. So it's even more so now.
So you said you had a record store in South LA in the late 80s, and you've been in the restaurant business in K-Town. Am I assuming that it's a thriving enterprise there these days?
Yeah, I mean it's doing well.
Okay.
It's doing well. It was a struggle at first. At first, it was some resistance from the old school Koreatown businesses. Like made me feel like I didn't belong. Because I was
Interesting.
not a Korean business, even though it was a Colombian Korean fusion.
Yeah, I love it.
They didn't appreciate that. But I came in right at a time when Koreatown took a big change, big turn. So during that time was when a lot of the big chefs were Korean, like Roy Choi, and so it worked. It was good timing.
Yeah. Well, Alex, having worked for a former mayor of LA and a former governor of the state of California, I'm sure you certainly appreciate this angle. And as early this month, the LA Area Chamber, launched World Trade Week, which kicks off, I think, the 96th year of this annual celebration that it speaks to Southern California's connectedness to the globe and the importance of global trade. And certainly, there aren't many more relationships more important than the one that we as a region have with South Korea. I believe in 2021 we exported about $11.6 billion worth of goods to South Korea. And as Janet talked about FDI, foreign direct investment, I think foreign direct investment accounts for about $62 billion into our region. So certainly this is an important one from our government perspective in terms of facilitating and fostering that relationship. What can you speak to that economic relationship and the importance of it?
Oh, of course. And I definitely want to hear from Janet later on because she is very involved in the Korean International Trade, different associations. But from my experience, people forget that there was a establishment when I was working for Governor Schwarzenegger to advocate for the U.S.-Korea free trade agreement.
Okay.
And that was pushed. And it's hard to believe that Congress worked in a bipartisan manner before, as opposed to now.
Back in the day.
Yeah, back in the days. And you remember U.S. Congressmember Diane Watson, representing South LA, right? Worked with a very conservative Congress member out of Orange County, Ed Royce, Congressmember Ed Royce, a Republican, right? And they put aside their issues. They worked together because they knew that foreign direct investment from Korea, which is now the 9th largest economy in the world, but back then you had Hyundai, you had all these burgeoning conglomerates that are wanting to do business in California and throughout the U.S. was happening. So that establishment really jump-started the action for not only Korea but other partners in Asia to partner with Korean companies to get into the U.S., taking advantage of the free trade.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much like the bird's eye picture of what this happened. But we had a lot of advocates to make this happen. Yeah. And we're still benefiting. And South Korea is the only Asian nation to this date, not Japan, not China, Taiwan, Philippines, that has a free trade agreement with United States.
Right. Janet, do you want to add to that comment?
Yeah. Can I name some companies?
Yeah. One thing I'm curious about, Janet, is we talked about like Hyundai, so that's obviously a huge automotive company.
Yeah.
But in Koreatown itself, we got a lot of small businesses. So in terms of who's driving this larger economic relationship with these larger companies, or is there also an opportunity for this more micro engagement, small, medium-sized businesses to do business together?
Well, so when you talk about Hyundai or LG, all those companies, like I was saying earlier, they're using Koreatown as a stepping stone, supply chain. The Korean American community providing that in itself is a business, even though, they're not doing their solo, some unique business on their own. Somehow the Korean community kind of attached to the hip to South Korea, became trade partners, right? Kind of micro scale. It's not like a U.S.-Korea partnership, but a lot of, Korean community people were able to tap into some of the trade businesses that are driven by South Korea. When is the last time that, consumer went out for Panasonic or Sony Electronic? Right. You go to the mall, it's all LG and Samsung. I hate to drop all these names. They should really pay us for, advertising all these brands. So, Dwayne, you go after them, okay?
Right. Well, Janet, I appreciate as our little podcast continues to grow that we've now got listeners per Libsyn in 42 countries, and I'm pleased to say that Korea is the number six country in terms of listenership for CivitasLA.
Well, then let me drop more names. Okay. So Nongshim came in, right? Nongshim, I don't know if you are familiar. It is one of the large. Never heard about?
Never heard of.
Oh no,
it's
that's not right. That's not
Korea.
It's the ramen. The instant noodle.
The noodles, okay.
Yeah, it has become basically number one selling noodle in U.S.
Wow. Okay.
Thanks to COVID, a lot of people are staying home and lots of YouTube, and it became kind of cultural kind of thing to have ramen, right? And also we have a Parasite movie that kind of placed that instant noodle as a some cultural experience, right? Nongshim has opened 2 factories down in Rancho Cucamonga.
Oh, wow.
The second factory, they just opened up at the end of April. $200 million of foreign direct investment to San Bernardino County. They're now looking at factory number 3. That's how much business they're generating, producing lots of jobs and, doing a U.S. manufacturing.
Will that be in Southern California?
Southern California, San Bernardino County, right? And have you seen the the Lakers jersey lately?
They're not doing
Lakers
so well,
is
so I'm not following
wearing
them.
BBGO, CJ BBGO logo.
Okay.
So CJ
right.
is one of the largest Korean food processing company.
Wow.
And decided to sponsor Lakers.
Okay.
So Lakers
Go
out
Lakers.
there showcasing
There you go.
CJ,
We like that.
right?
Yeah, that's
So,
great.
to talk about all these, the commerce that's happening, a partnership between U.S. and Korea. And let's not forget the K-pop. BTS had a concert in, Inglewood Stadium. So
Right. Well, let's actually talk about that. That's a great segue because let's talk about arts and culture, which has certainly, become so mainstream here in the U.S. and certainly here in Southern California. The role of arts and culture, and we can't divorce that from food. So, Pulitzer Prize-winning food critic for the LA Times, Jonathan Gold, named Koreatown's culinary scene, quote unquote, the best in the world outside of Korea. So, Chino, is that correct? And
I'm not sure.
Is that correct? And what do you think makes the restaurant scene in the food in K-Town so good and so dynamic?
Well, I think Koreatown is made up mostly of moms and pops businesses. So when you don't have too much and you come here as an immigrant, you're going to invest in your business and it's going to be everything, right?
Yeah.
So your passion, you put everything into it. I think that's what it is. And it's not business owners hiring chefs. It's their mom cooking, and that goes for other cultures. The Oaxacan restaurants, the Central American restaurants, they're all family owned and run, and I think that's what makes the food so good. I think they put actual love into it, and they want their business to do well, and they don't have the money to do advertising or anything, so it's the food. Yeah.
And certainly for Escala, we want to give a shout out to Escala first of all. Tell people where to find it. You said that certainly the hip hop and DJ community in LA, really kept Escala going through hard times, and that your restaurant somehow has become this center for the music industry in LA. So tell us about that. How did that happen?
Well, my music industry background helped. I come from the DJ community. I used to manage DJs. I used to DJ myself.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And when the space was offered, I wasn't thinking restaurant. I was thinking of the parties I was going to have there.
Okay. So for our audience, tell us about the space. Give us the address.
3451 West 6th Street, corner of Kenmore, Chapman Plaza.
Excellent.
if you know Chino, sometimes he gives away free food too.
Well, I
Big
actually
secret.
order it and have it delivered to my office. I DoorDash, but now that I know it's free,
You just gotta come.
I'll go and pick it up instead.
You just
right?
gotta come
Chino
out
sent
and
me.
hang out.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the hip hop community in LA is really tight knit.
Absolutely.
It's like a family. So when they knew, it was COVID, a lot of people came to support. And they would order their food to go, and as soon as we opened, they flooded the place. They couldn't wait to come back. Because I think Escala is more than just the food. It's the environment. It's good times. It's fun. It's a party. So a lot of people come just for the culture of it and for the fun, not so much for the food,
Right.
but also the food.
Yeah. No, we love it. Well, certainly, I saw not long ago, a couple of weeks ago, there was a big article, or maybe it was an op-ed piece in the LA Times that talked about the rise of K-pop and the success of Squid Game on Netflix, and this huge rise in Korean culture here in the U.S. Speak to the importance of this movement of Korean pop culture into the American mainstream, and how is Koreatown leveraging that, and how does our region benefit from this explosion of culture from Korea? Alex, do you want to talk about culture?
Yeah. Well, the way I see it is, Hollywood's always been the first, in terms of media, stars, entertainment. Dwayne, you do business there at the Hollywood Chamber. And with Korea, we're just following a wave. They call it the Hallyu, right? The Korean wave. But people forget. Before that, it was Hong Kong films, And
Right.
before that, don't forget Godzilla, right? Japan
Godzilla.
in the 50s. So I see it from a bird's eye perspective of this wave that we're in the Korean wave. What's going to happen next? I would love to see the Korean wave keep on going,
Yeah.
right? And from that, it's great because it's not just helping Koreatown, improving the image, but with the anti-Asian hate things happening, the unfortunate incidents across the country since the COVID wave, the misplaced anger toward Asian Americans, as blaming them for their job losses and things. From my perspective, and many of my Asian American friends, BTS was a saving grace for us. Seeing mainstream, it's mostly mainstream people coming to watch BTS concerts. Seeing Squid Game on Netflix, right?
Yeah.
There are other shows that are Korean dramas are consistently placing, top 10 on Netflix and other streaming channels. So I think placing that positive image of having an Asian face on there that happens to be Korean is a big boon. Like saying, wow, I want to be like that. Yeah. When I wear my Adidas jacket, every time it's like, hey, you look like that Squid Game guy. It puts a smile on my face, right? I mean, it's like it's amazing.
That's great.
And I think it's among other Asian Americans, it's a sense of pride. Yeah. It's like, wow, Asia has its own Hollywood. You go to any Vietnamese cafe or Chinese restaurant, they have Korean dramas on there,
right? No,
dubbed
absolutely.
into their own language,
right?
sometimes.
Right. Well, certainly entertainment is such a huge,
huge
importance to our collective coming together. Janet, I'm sure you've got some comments with regards to the role of arts and culture driving our economic relationship with Korea.
Oh, absolutely. So it all started, in my opinion, Parasite.
Okay.
When that movie came to U.S. and ended up being the Oscar winner, right? Who knew?
Yeah.
I mean, I was watching it going, yeah, it's pretty good, but not that great. But
maybe you should have been an Academy voter.
the impact it had, that one movie, and just having a domino effect one after another is just amazing. With the director who just fell in love, the Parasite director fell in love with the one small mom and pop restaurant called Soban. Right around Olympic, he would pop up, and at the end of the day, when we won the Oscar, where did he go? He went to that mom and pop small restaurant, had a big old after party, and of course, then that restaurant just took off. Right. And already had a really good food, good restaurant, and with the Parasite director giving a little bit of push, it just became a world sensation.
Yeah,
right.
That's great.
That kind of triggers a lot of people to go, hey, maybe I gotta go explore Koreatown. So we have a lot of outsider now coming into Koreatown, just kind of creating more e-commerce.
That's great.
To me, it's like this whole entertainment influence. Just like Alex, I'm just kind of dreading when is it gonna drop off.
Right.
It's going to come to an end sometime,
and,
right?
And who's the next
Hopefully
country?
not.
What's the next
country,
one?
region?
So I got to go ahead and, catch this opportunity. But then again, it's just continuing, to move on. So it's exciting, but, who knows?
Yeah. So this has been a great conversation. So as we wind down, we always like to conclude our community spotlights with an inside look at some of your favorites about this particular community. So as we finish our K-Town conversation, the first and most important and most illustrious Koreatown in America, we want to hear from you, our guests, about some of your favorites. Janet, are we ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, let's start with a favorite Korean restaurant. Or, we love Korean barbecue, so give us a favorite restaurant or Korean barbecue place or two. Janet.
Suwon Galbi is my favorite Korean barbecue.
Okay.
Just one.
Okay, just one. Alex.
I have two favorite restaurants.
Okay.
BCD Tofu House, because they also serve Korean barbecue along with hot soup, hot spicy tofu.
Okay.
And Honey Pig is my second restaurant because they just present that big old, almost like a Mongolian style, big old plate in front of you.
Pork
and
belly.
it's cooking pork bellies.
Pork
Good
bellies.
Lord.
Can't go wrong with bacon.
Yeah.
Well, you know, this is probably no fair to ask the restaurateur. Give us a favorite restaurant or a Korean barbecue place or two.
Any restaurant or just Korean barbecue?
Whatever you want.
Well, I'm into the old classic spots in Koreatown that are left, like maybe Noshi Sushi on Beverly and
Yes, I love that
El
place.
Colmao, Cuban on Pico. Those are like old school spots. I like going to my old school spots.
Okay. Give us a favorite place to take a sip, whether that's coffee, tea, or cocktail. Chino, we'll start with you.
Again, an old school spot, HMS Bounty on Wilshire.
Yes.
That's been around.
Alex.
I love boba. That's the name of the place. I like boba.
Okay. Janet, you have a favorite place to take a sip?
Gotta say Escala because I get
Oh,
free
come
drinks.
Now you're gonna
No,
do more.
I love free stuff, Chino. That's all I
like
have to
Escala,
say.
I can say that I've had the mango smoothie at Escala, which was
Okay.
outstanding.
Oh, you haven't had it spiked yet? Huh?
No,
Okay.
no. Favorite place to take a visitor? Alex.
Two places, just to be fair. I like Koreatown Galleria, a lot of shops,
Okay.
and also the Koreatown Plaza,
Okay.
another mall.
Got you. Janet. Favorite place to take a visitor?
Rodeo Drive. That's where all the Koreans would love to hang out. Even though they can't afford to buy anything, they still like to be in the best place to shop.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will share with you that my first visit ever to California and to Los Angeles specifically, I remember staying at the home of a college classmate, Korean American family, and that was my first time ever staying in someone's home in Beverly Hills, actually. So, so that was my first experience in LA. Favorite place to take a visitor, Chino?
Well, in Koreatown, I'm gonna say the Chapman Market Plaza. Not because Escala is there, but it's a historic building and it's a beautiful building and it's a landmark and LA landmark, and a couple of the most popular barbecue places are there, Korean barbecue.
Okay.
Quarters and Baekjeong. So
Okay. Well, I know, from my days when I, served on the city's redevelopment agency, this came up a lot, particularly with regards to K-Town, and that was the issue of open space. And one of the things that we talk about a lot on CivitasLA and our lightning rounds is give us a favorite hike or park. And we know the K-Town community has always been advocating for more open space for the community. So give us a favorite hike or park, K-Town or elsewhere. Janet.
Oh, I'll have to pass. I don't do hiking, so I couldn't give you a good answer.
I like that answer. I don't do hiking. That's good. That's a first. Alex.
Well, I'll do two locations because Janet waived her rights, yielded to me. My first one I liked is Griffith Park, up to the Griffith Observatory.
Love
you
it.
have a lot
Love
of
it.
Korean Americans hiking
Love it.
there, so I've been doing that
But not
since.
Janet. though.
Not except Janet, yes.
I don't hike.
But my parents used to do that, and I did before. And then the second location is Mandeville Canyon.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic view of LA right there, top of the hill.
Chino, any favorite hikes or parks from your perspective?
well, when I used to like hiking, I would say Griffith Park too.
Yeah.
Just because it's really accessible. You could see it from Koreatown and just head over there. And,
Well, we're grateful that people are coming back together post-pandemic and community events and activities are happening again. So give us a favorite K-Town community activity or event, Janet.
I would give it a shout out to Korea Kimchi Day.
Okay, when is
That's
that?
right.
So every year, November 22nd, is a kimchi day for South Korea, where community, every single person in Korea will go ahead and make a kimchi for the winter season.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I did not know that.
Korea has a 4 distinctive season. Wintertime, you don't get any fresh produce. So fall, November, they'll go ahead and buy like 100 heads of cabbage. And then community or the neighbors will get together, make kimchi together, and they'll store them for the
Wow.
winter time.
Okay.
And in celebration for that, California started to go ahead and have a Korea Kimchi Day. In fact, state of California passed the resolution.
Oh, interesting.
I, help Assembly Member Stephen Choi to go ahead and declare California Kimchi Day, November 22nd.
Excellent.
So this November, we're taking Korea Kimchi Day to Orange County.
Okay.
Date to be determined, but I'll be back to share more information when we have more information.
Excellent. Alex, give us a favorite community activity or event.
Well, the Koreatown parade in LA, only because I participated in it so many times.
And when is that?
Representing different politicians. Usually it's in the fall. I would say like September, October timeframe.
Okay.
And along that, you have the big old festival at Seoul International Park. Yeah. It's also called Ardmore Park before, but renamed by the late Councilmember Tom Labange.
Sure.
So it's a great way to experience Korean food and buying Korean stuff.
Excellent. Chino, give us a favorite community activity or event from your perspective.
Well, I don't think I know enough. I didn't know about Kimchi Day.
Okay.
But I mean, I like the Korean festival too at the park. But I think Koreatown needs to have more community events to represent the other cultures also. I think Koreatown needs to work on that.
No, that's great. We appreciate that. This dialogue has been great, and we appreciate your being with us, and we all appreciate your service, to community, not only just the Koreatown community, but to our Los Angeles community and Los Angeles family as well. As we say on CivitasLA, the guest gets the final word. So give us any final thoughts that you might have about the future of Koreatown, or how the community may evolve, and more importantly for our listeners, who may not be as involved as the three of you are, how can we get more people involved? That's always a question for us. Janet.
That's a really good question. I'm thinking as you are, phrasing this question, just like Chino actually just mentioned, you're absolutely right. We don't really have any one community event that pulls all the communities together. Perhaps that's something we have to do. Last year, when I hosted Korea Kimchi Day in Los Angeles, I made a topic of diversity and inclusion. So what I did is, I invited, I think there's a total of 23 consulates in Los Angeles area. That's a huge number. So we ended up, inviting, different consulate general to come and experience the culture and the food. Because, really the best way to learn each other is
through food.
Yeah, food and culture. So maybe that would be a short answer.
Okay.
Was it a short enough?
Well, we can add something else on your to-do list since you're so engaged. You're going to set up a new event. Alex, any final thoughts that you want to share, or particularly, ideas and opportunities for listeners who may want to get involved in the community?
Oh, yes, definitely. I believe, focusing on the Korean American community side, I think it'll be great to have our community acknowledge the foundational aspect of what the African American community has done in helping with civil rights, that we enjoy today as minorities, and how they were able to leverage the black churches to have more political empowerment. And Koreans have that advantage they have not used yet by having all these faith-based churches, Catholic Church, Protestant, the Buddhist temples, that they're not connected to the civic empowerment as much as the other minority groups have. Okay. But in terms of being engaged with the Korean community from the mainstream, definitely reach out to folks like us that are in between the mainstream and the Koreatown communities. We have safety lines that Janet and I are part of, this Korean American Coalition, and other groups that are all English speaking, and for a purpose, because we are first 1.5 second generation. That's our preferred language, and to bridge with the first generation, like the Korean American Federation, the chamber that still speaks mostly in Korean.
Excellent.
So
great. Chino, the last word, you get it. Final thoughts.
Well, I think if there was a way, if there was more communication between like a lot of young people that are forming groups in Koreatown, like the Koreatown Run Club. I see them do a lot of cool stuff, like a cleanup day where they pick up trash around Koreatown. I saw another group get together right on my corner, which is a group against the anti-Asian thing, and they would walk people home or whatever. But they do those things out of goodwill without any support from the government, from the city. And if there was a way they could communicate easier with people that could lend some support, I think that would help a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Janet, Alex, and Chino, thank you for joining us today. And I want to extend a special thank you to the Korean Culture Center, Inc. for their interest in our work and the generous support of this episode. Without sponsors like them, this work would not be possible. We all appreciate the work that KCCI does to foster cross-cultural relationships and promote local economic development initiatives to ensure the community's continued vibrancy. And to our audience, as always, thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this program, and we hope you'll join us in 2 weeks as we look forward to yet another great civic conversation. Until we meet again, stay strong and get involved. To learn more about CivitasLA and to share feedback on this program or recommend a future program, please visit us at www.civitasla.com. And don't forget to connect with us on Facebook at CivitasLA, on Instagram at Civitas_LA, and on Twitter at Civitas_LA.